Shit, sorry, I always forget what I'm supposed to say here. Right.
Isn't that it? What do I say? Shit, fuck, sorry. I feel like that would go over with the audience for this particular cast.
Ask the Hosts, Episode 6. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
I'm Graham.
Hello, chaps. If you've never listened before, the idea is very simple. Listeners send in their questions for us and we answer them. They can be about anything you like, as long as it's not Linux and open source. You can send the questions in to show@askthehost.com. And we also have to thank the people who support us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you support us on Patreon at any level at all, then you'll get episodes of this show 2 weeks before everyone else who doesn't support us. So go to askthehost.com/support for details there. Right, the first question then, from Bill. It's Halloween time. What's your spookiest real-life memory?
I didn't know which one to go for. There's quite a few that I could choose. I got locked in a castle in Castletown on the Isle of Man. I lived in an abandoned farmhouse next to a National Trust property and we tried to summon the devil there. But
Wow.
I'm going to answer honestly. It isn't really a flippant story. It's not really that funny, but it is one that has genuinely haunted me. And I've chosen this as well because I think this is probably something very close to Jim. So in the early 90s, I spent a year at university in Atlanta in Georgia. And I didn't have any money and we made friends and friends would drive us out to places at the weekend. And I'm still in touch with some of them. I'm still in touch with this one particular person I spent the weekend with when a few of us piled in the back of his car and drove to Lake Murray, which I think is pretty close to, I don't know if I'm revealing anything, it's pretty close to where Jim may have lived.
You can't throw a rock and hear the splash from my house, but if you built a trebuchet, maybe.
So it's just over the border from Atlanta in South Carolina. And we did this, I think it was spring because it was warm. We were going to camp out. And we drove out to Lake Murray and we got a kind of a small, shallow boat. There was about 6 of us. And one of us was from around the region, so kind of knew what they were doing. But there's a load of islands in Lake Murray, and you can kind of just cast off and get to one of these islands. And we had a couple of cases of beer, and we were going to sit on the island, have some beers, and then go back the next day. And we had to do it in 2 trips. And so me and a friend who I'm still friends with went on the boat the first time with the person who was going to pilot the boat back. And it was about half an hour it took to get us to the middle of this huge lake. Lake Murray is huge with a dam at one end that you can just see in the distance and the flashing lights. It was dusk. We dropped off on the island. We dropped off the food and the beer. No lights whatsoever. It got really dark. And the person who piloted our boat went back to get the other people. They were going to be an hour or so. So here I was in the middle of a lake, in the middle of South Carolina, in a balmy kind of spring evening. And we were kind of sat on the beach having a beer. It was getting very dark. And then out in the lake, we could hear something. We could hear someone calling. They didn't seem far away. And just kind of in the dusky gloam, you could see a flashing light, somebody waving, calling. The sound kind of came in and out. And my friend and I kind of stood there, called out to the lake. They called back to us. We thought somebody was taking the piss. We were a little bit worried that a load of, fraternity people came out to haze people every weekend and we'd become part of the joke. And the longer and longer this went on, the more and more kind of scared and worried we got. We didn't know what to do. We couldn't get off the island. We couldn't raise any help. This was before any of us had phones. And eventually, the shouting got worse and worse and then faded away. And our other friends arrived and we kind of told them what happened. Everybody kind of joked about it. And we all stayed up far too late, kind of lay down and went to sleep. Woke up the next morning, got the boat back to the shore. And then the friend who took us out there, his father was a police officer, and he told us that a boat where we had been staying had been abandoned, and the 2 people on the boat had fallen off the boat and drowned.
Oof.
And that is a story that has genuinely stayed with me and kind of haunted me. And I don't think that was the idea for this question, but that was my first thought when I came to an answer to that, because I can still see that person kind of calling in the night who I assume was these people calling for help. And I also wish I'd have done more, although us swimming into the pitch black lake when we had no idea where we were and probably quite a long way from them. We couldn't do much, but I kind of do wish I'd done more. I don't know. Does that count or is that a big downer?
We were going for spooky. That's more horrific, I think, than spooky, to be honest.
It's better than anything I got. I'm really wishing this was a video podcast right now, because what you listeners can't see is Graham, as he's telling this story in his darkly red lit room with monitor lights spilling onto his face. It is just one RCH away from the classic, hold the flashlight under your chin pose while you tell the spooky story around the campfire. I don't think I really have anything that good. I mean, I've never really been one for believing in this spooky, haunted, ghost, whatever. My mom believes in that stuff. The closest thing I guess I've got to technically spooky is literally just wandering around my own house in the dark, because I really enjoy that for some reason. I get a kick out of walking around with just barely enough light to, get like a sense of objects in front of you just before you walk into them and walk around them, which I have learned through experience is nowhere near enough light for most people not to just like lie down on the floor and wait for somebody to come get them. But I like it for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Once we visited there's a local national park, another really large outdoor area. This is the Congaree National Swamp, and they have a population of the lesser known species of firefly that all flashes in synchronicity with one another. Usually fireflies are just random, but there's this one species that like they sync up. And we went out there with a group of family friends that I dearly ended up wishing we had not brought, because they insisted on having flashlights on and like cell phone flashlights on, and their kids had light up sneakers. I never did get a good look at those fireflies. But the other thing is, we could not convince these people to conserve any battery on any of their devices. So by the time we're ready to leave, after it's clear that there will be no more, fireflies, we are several miles deep into a swamp forest. Now, granted, we're on a boardwalk, but I mean, it's deep forest. We are many, many miles away from anything vaguely resembling street lighting or anything. I mean, when I say it's pitch black, it is pitch freaking black. So by the time we're ready to head back through miles of, pitch black forest, the only device left that has any battery that can produce any light is my cell phone. And I really didn't want to use that either, but for the longest time, Jane, my daughter, and I had walked out in front of the group, way in front of the group, where the flashlights wouldn't mess with us. And I had taught her to do what I did, which is you just kind of get a sense of like, it's hard to describe, but you can sense whether there's something in front of you or not, even when it's almost completely pitch black. It's not enough to like navigate a cluttered room, but it's enough to keep yourself somewhere vaguely centered in like a 6-foot wide boardwalk when you can't see a thing. So most of the way back, I rejoined the group and I was walking in front of it with my cell phone flashlight on and just kind of sweeping it back and forth, at my feet as I went. And very disgruntled about the whole thing, to be honest.
I don't have a specific spooky story, but a couple of times over the last year or so, it's been incredibly foggy in London. And I generally go walking at night, and I kind of get to this park where I walk around, and I just couldn't see anything. It was just like completely foggy. And then walking around that park, there's kind of lights in various places, and it's just very spooky looking. I don't believe in any of the supernatural nonsense, but there's something a bit unnerving about not being able to see more than 20, 30 feet in front of you.
Yeah, it's an instinct, isn't it, I think?
Yeah.
I took a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge the first time that I went to San Francisco. My friend Todd and I went out specifically to go see the bridge, and it was a very foggy morning, and we got to an overlook right by the bridge. I mean, the bridge is like a block away from this overlook, right? And I insisted on taking the picture anyway. It is unrelieved gray, the exact same shade on every single pixel on the camera, because literally that was the view.
Yeah.
Just completely unrelieved gray.
All right, Mutton Jute asks, have you sung in public and what did you sing?
You don't have to call me darling, darling. Karaoke's about it for me.
I've sung many, many times in public. I've been in bands, I've done karaoke, I've done rockioke, which is like live rock band karaoke. That's good fun. And I've even sung in front of people at events and stuff, at Linux events. So yes, I've sung many times, some of my own songs, some of other people's songs. Graham, I know you are musical, but do you ever sing?
Well, not for a long time. I used to be in a band, a friend and myself. He played electric guitar. And I still am, but we were into improvisation, so I would sing and make it up at the same time. But it was more like KMFDM or, I suppose, early Nine Inch Nails. It was kind of angry. I remember, okay, this is a bit geeky, but I'd take my Amiga out and play samples on the Amiga and use it for like drum machines. The whole thing, the memory modules would come out. I can remember sampling the end music of Tekken 2 running on a PlayStation because it had the end titles on an audio track on the CD. And a genuine fight breaking out in the pub when we did this. And it's so I'd hire a DAT machine and record it. So I have got a recording of it somewhere. I couldn't even get it off today because I haven't got a DAT machine, but there's a recording of me singing this angry, angst-ridden song through this distorted DAT, and then a fight breaking out, I think, when somebody's phone went off and somebody else got pissed off about it.
My favorite part of that story is you opening with singing KMFDM and then saying, but then it gets a little geeky. When we started so mainstream.
Okay, Sergio asks, have you ever tried one-bagging for travel? If not, what's holding you back?
Well, I'm told you're not supposed to double bag it. That's not safe. In all seriousness, I tried a one bag, for every trip because I have had checked baggage disappear en route from one place to the other far too many times to deliberately risk that. So I'm basically always one bagging it and just praying that they won't decide to take it away from me before I can board anyway, because that's also a thing that has happened to me rather frequently.
Yeah, and I think I've done it quite a bit. I mean, in the olden days, I went backpacking with the tent and everything on my back. But also now that I travel quite a lot, it's so much easier when you can do everything from a single bag. I mean, the risk of things getting lost is just too high and too disruptive. Honestly, I'm pretty good. I don't need much, T-shirts and underwear and a laptop is about it. One of the reasons I don't go camping anymore is because it's become far too complicated and the car gets filled up and I just hate the organisation of it.
I'm the complete opposite of this one-bagging idea. I don't like going places where I have to go on a plane because I can't just fill the entire back of my car with crap. I take like all speakers and a bag full of cables and loads of food and drinks and, I'm just terrible. I just cannot travel light.
But computers do everything you need. That's the most amazing thing. You just have a screen somewhere. You have to have a screen.
A screen? A?
Well, yeah, it's true.
Is this air travel? Because a screen's not going to cut it.
Oh, but it's embarrassing when you go through security and you get out like 4 different screens. No, I'm on my own. I'm not traveling with the kids.
Yeah, I had that when I went to America. I had 2 laptops and a tablet, I think, or maybe, I think it was that. But no, I could never do this, partially because it's funny, when my wife is folding the washing, she like folds one of her T-shirts and then one of my pairs of pants, and my pair of pants is bigger than one of her T-shirts because I'm quite a big fellow.
To be clear, we are discussing pants in the British sense, not the American sense, right?
Yes, yeah, underpants, boxers. So I just need a lot of space for all my stuff.
Your boxers are bigger than her shirts and you haven't already smothered the poor woman?
Yeah, what can I say? I like baggy boxers. All right. STFN or Stefan asks, how many human languages have you started learning in your lives? How did it go? So this doesn't include programming languages.
Well, English went pretty well. I'd like to think I did pretty well with that one.
Well, on your fork of English, maybe.
But, beyond that, I have a smattering of any number of languages, but I rarely am able to get much further than that. I think the problem is just, it's like dual booting, When you first try to pick up Linux, if you weren't a Linux person to start with, and, back in the 90s, you dual boot and you'd never get anywhere with it because the minute you don't know how to do something in the second operating system, you're booting right back into the first one. And then it's hard to make yourself leave it because you know how to do everything there and you don't know how to make everything go in the other one.
Yeah.
So I've learned a bit of German, a bit of French, a bit of Spanish, a bit of Japanese, and I can ask for a beer or the bathroom in 3 or 4 other languages, but I'm not conversationally fluent in anything but English.
I lived in France for 4 years and I can get by in French. I honestly would say I cannot speak French, but I can understand most of what's being said and I can read most French. And as I usually answer in single syllables or don't bother answering at all anyway in English, then I can get by in French conversation. It's not a regret because it's still on my to-do list. I really love to become fluent in a language and fluent in French and be able to converse with people who aren't speaking English. And it looks to me like technology is going to save the day and I won't have to, but it is a life regret that I can't get away with it.
Yeah, the Babel fish seems to get closer every day with Google Translate and other stuff.
Yeah.
I just have this sinking feeling they're not going to overlook the stick something gross in your ear aspect of it by the time they get down to the final bit.
We went to Greece on holiday this summer, and I'm sorry, I just can't understand a word of Greek. And it makes you realize how much you do perhaps pick up from other languages that I'm more exposed to, like French or like German or Italian or Spanish, because I can usually, at least understand the signs and understand menus, but it just makes you realize, obviously, the world out there. But Greek was just so alienating in a good way, but just makes me realize how little I actually know.
Well, I learned French at school, as you're kind of forced to. And then when I had options of what I wanted to learn, what subjects I had to pick, I went for Spanish and German, and that was just a disaster. I just was not good at it at all, it turned out. I don't know why I thought I would be, but I just thought, well, yeah, languages, let's give that a go. And so I did 2 years of those and just came out not speaking a word of them. So I suppose I technically tried to learn. And then my wife is German, as I've mentioned before, and she has tried to teach me German, but it's that dual boot thing, man. We both live here. She's excellent at English. There's not really any pressing need for me to speak German. If we moved over there, maybe, but I suppose I've tried to learn that. I think technically they're the only other languages I've tried to learn. I did, when I was at school, thought I'd be clever, and I got a book out of the library, Learn Esperanto, but that didn't really work out very well.
Yeah, I was real big on the idea of Esperanto when I was a kid, but pretty quickly you realize, okay, it might be the most logical language ever, except you'll never be able to speak it to anybody, so what's the freaking point? And that was pretty much that.
And it just wasn't as easy as I thought it would be either. Like, I thought it's just a really logical, easy to learn language, and then it just wasn't, because I was very lazy.
That's interesting that you were exposed to Esperanto in the US, Jim. Was that common, or was that just your particular interest?
I'm a sci-fi nerd.
Right.
You're not going to read every bit of sci-fi available to you from the 60s through the 80s and not come across at least a mention of Esperanto at some point. There were a lot of, golden future histories where everybody supposedly speaks Esperanto, which they signify by, giving you like 2 sentences in an entire novel. And other than that, it's just all English. And you're just left to, okay, we know that really they're speaking Esperanto because it's the future and everybody's smart.
All right, Linka asks, what stuff have you all created? Woodworking and such, knitted hat or whatever. Now, I'll post a link to this in the show notes if I remember. I have created beautiful purple shelves, and I've also created with that same purple paint an MDF 1x10 cab. So by that, I mean it's a 10-inch guitar speaker or guitar amp speaker in a box that I built out of MDF and painted purple. And I didn't have a jigsaw, so I wasn't able to cut it out round the kind of hole for the speaker. So I did a really, really bad job of it. But my wife is into crocheting and knitting, and she crocheted some doilies for a while. And so I got a really cool doily and stapled that to the front of it. And so you can't see my horrendous woodwork. And this thing sounds like an angry box of bees when you plug a guitar amp into it and crank up the distortion. It sounds horrible in a really, well, it sounds good in a horrible way or horrible in a good way, I suppose. So that's my proudest crafting creation so far.
I'm more of a maintainer and a repairer than a maker, really, when it comes to physical things. I have resurrected a lot of old cars from the dead and, repaired all kinds of appliances and what have you. But I guess really as far as making things from, scratch or what have you, unless you count my kids, I'm going to fall back on the Navy again because for a few years in the Navy, I was a metal worker. I worked in the ship fitter shop and then in the sheet metal shop. So I've made an awful lot of mediocre bottle racks and shelves of various kinds and stainless steel boxes that are going to go in pantries and whatever.
This is the toughest question for me. There's a lot of stuff I've 3D printed. That probably doesn't count, does it? I took down a fence and built a wood store. And I'm not afraid of putting stuff together from the piles of things that we've got around that we need, like shelves and stuff, but it's ugly as fuck. It really is awful. Considering I'm a bit of a perfectionist when I get people to do work for us, when it comes to my own quality, if it performs the function, I don't care what it looks like. People will just have to put it with screws sticking out of it and whatever. I can't say any of that is really crafting an end result. I haven't done any knitting. There was a period at school where you could tie wool around little nails and create a kind of woven thing. I got into that briefly. Maybe I should get back into that again. But yeah, I'm sorry. I can't really answer this question adequately, I think.
You've reminded me, I built myself 2 acoustic bass traps for the corners of my studio that are just thin wooden boxes that I then put insulation in and wrapped in fabric and stapled. And I never finished stapling them. So there's fabric kind of flapping off them. I just did a quick job to see if it would work, and it did. And I just keep meaning to buy some more staples and finish the job, but I know I never will. It'll just be fabric flapping around, and they've killed the bass in that room, so what can I do?
Yeah. I mean, I've mended socks with a staple gun.
I cut a hole in the closet door so my cat could go in there to crap. Does that count?
Yeah, definitely.